right, let's get started. I'm Lori from HIS Talk, and I'll be moderating today. Welcome, and thanks for joining us for today's HIS Talk webinar. It's titled Data Governance, Why You Can't Put It Off, and it's brought to you by Encore, a Quintiles company. Attendee phone lines have been muted to prevent background noise. You can use GoToWebinar's questions box in the console to submit questions to our presenters at any time. You may want to familiarize yourself with that functionality in advance so when it's time to ask a question, you're able to do so. You also will want to familiarize yourself with the chat function so you can send questions to me that I can answer one-on-one. The presenters will answer your questions during Q&A at the end of the session. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll receive a link to the recording as well as a PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation. We have two speakers presenting today. First up is Randy Thomas. Randy is the Associate Partner responsible for Performance Analytics at Encore, a Quintiles company. Randy has over 25 years of experience in healthcare IT with a focus on analytics and the reuse of data to support the performance improvement efforts of healthcare organizations. Joining Randy will be Dr. Steve Morgan, MD, who is the Senior Vice President for Information Technology and Data Analytics and also CMIO for Carilion Clinic. Dr. Morgan has been involved in Carilion Clinic's integration and clinical transformation work, serving on multiple committees including the Care Integration and Clinical Informatics Committee. He's also a member of the Transformation Oversight Committee and on the Board of Directors for Doctors Connected, Carillion's ACO. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Randy.
To start things off today, I want to talk about the Data Governance Institute, which is a non-industry specific institute focused on the discipline of data governance. They've published a set of criteria that if any one of these criteria exist for an organization, the Data Governance Institute recommends that that's a trigger to begin implementing enterprise-wide data governance. Things such as the organizations are so large that you can't handle data-related cross-functional activities, or data systems are quite complicated, or that the various technical folks that need to coordinate all of the data-related functions, those teams get too large and complex, or if there's a regulation or compliance or contractual issues that require the reporting of data. If any one of these conditions are met, the Data Governance Institute says now's the time for data governance. But guess what? In healthcare, we have actually all four situations, criteria met. And so the time is really screaming out to really address data governance as an enterprise-wide discipline. And stressing in a definition of data governance that it is a discipline. It's not a department. It's not a hierarchy or group of people that are kind of off on the side, but a discipline of an organization really formally addressing the fact that data is a valuable asset and that structures and processes need to be put in place to manage and enhance that asset over time. So frequently, though, when we go into organizations and to talk about data governance, organizations will say, well, we've got interfaces. We've got very well documented interfaces. We've got a great interface diagram. We really monitor all of our interfaces. But interfaces are not data governance. It's a means to use data across the organization, but that's not data governance. Sometimes organizations will say, well, we've got a management hierarchy, usually in IT, that's focused on the data. And that's great that there are folks that are focused on the data, but a management hierarchy isn't data governance either. Or we'll hear, well, we have a standardized application portfolio, and therefore we have data governance. Well, it's great when portfolios are standardized, but that is not data governance either. It's an enterprise-wide discipline so that as the pressures in healthcare on this journey that we're on from fee-for-service to fee-for-value, where the need to report quality and other type of outcome and process metrics related to different levels of reimbursement, as that drive is continuing, the need to really understand what's the data that's the consistency, reliability, and accuracy of the data that's underlying and feeding all of those metrics that are being reported to both regulatory bodies as well as commercial payers. That's really the driver and the focus organizations need to have to ensure that that everybody knows what the data is, what's important, what processes are driving that, and what is the consistency, reliability, and accuracy of that data. So to kind of break it down, data governance is focused on really this whole concept of anatomy of a data element. Data is created in a variety of source systems. Those source systems create those individual data elements. When you look at various analytic and measurement capabilities, whether for population health or to manage cost and margin, to look at quality metrics, that data is repurposed to support the analytics in those various areas. And that kind of analytics and reporting and measurement is in turn used to support various organizational initiatives like participating in Medicare shared savings, or something like a partnership for patients, or any other type of initiative. So when you think of that journey that data goes on, data governance is in place to really ensure that as the data travels from its origin through this process to go through very analytic applications and to support these organizational initiatives, that the data is as expected. It starts out as expected, and it makes the journey and ends up in its intended place as expected, so that you don't have the situation when somebody is looking at a report or on a dashboard and going, ugh, this is wrong. You want to be sure you really understand what your data is and that it's making that journey successfully. Just a really, I think, a bit of a whimsical example of sort of the challenge that we're facing in healthcare is one that was published by the Mayo Clinic. And the Mayo in Rochester went around and took pictures of different elevator control panels, and noticed that to the same level, the subway level, which is their underground level, isn't called the same thing on every elevator, nor is the street level called the same thing. And then what I love is the think fast. I'm always feel so inadequate in an elevator when someone says, "Can you hold that for me?" And I go to the elevator panel and we're trying to find where's the hold the open door button. And this is part of the challenge. There isn't a standard for what it's called or where it's placed, so that you always know where to get it. So that's just a little example of really what we're facing in healthcare. Do we really know what the state of the data is, and are we managing it to a level of standardization so that it can be utilized as needed? But there needs to be focus to data governance. So, I mean, I love this, get all the information you can, we'll think of a use for it later. That isn't the focus of data governance either. You want to really prioritize and iterate the data that you bring under governance, because not all data generated by all applications needs to have an enterprise focus. Some of that data is for a very specific niche purpose within a department, and that's fine. And then if a question comes up at some point in the future, does anybody collect such and such a piece of data? If that niche piece of data is needed, then it can come under governance. But by and large, you want to start with the data that matters most and iterate through bringing into governance that data. So now I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Morgan, who's going to talk about the journey that Carilion Clinic has been on as they've brought data governance into the organization. Dr. Morgan?
Thank you, Randy, and good day to everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity to be able to share our journey, and it is an ongoing journey. This is something that, if done correctly, data governance becomes part of the culture of the organization, and it's certainly where we are heading. I wanted to start out to give you some idea of where Carilion Clinic is, not only geographically, but also where we are in our journey on moving from a fee-for-service to a fee-for-value organization. Carilion Clinic is an integrated delivery system, and we're located in Southwest Virginia. Our system consists of 6 hospitals, about 200 ambulatory sites, and we have around 650 employed physicians and 300 advanced care practitioners. We have a large GME, graduate medical education program, and that starts from a medical school that we have an affiliation with Virginia Tech, and we also have multiple residencies and fellowships. Our catchment area is about 1 million people, so it's in multiple communities. As you can see from the map, we have a wide geographic spread and footprint. And one of the things, because of this geography, in our organization and the diversity that we have, particularly from urban to rural and the complexities, really having standards around how we collect our data, the governance of the data, where it goes, and the data usage really is critical for us to be successful, both as an integrated delivery system and also to be a data-driven organization. Carilion has a long history of using technology and data to drive changes. In the past, we've used multiple systems and had a best-of-breed, like many hospital systems, starting in the mid-'80s and into the '90s. And we unified all those systems in 2008 when we moved to one enterprise solution for an electronic medical record and billing system under Epic. This was all part of our multi-year plan starting in 2006 to prepare the organization to move from a traditional fee-for-service to fee-for-value. Beginning in 2010, the organization began to entertain the idea of becoming an accountable care organization, or an ACO. We felt like we had in place, and we did, much of the foundational infrastructure in building a clinic model and building a lot of the IT infrastructure. But one of the things that we recognized is that at the time we lacked a repository to bring in outside claims. We knew that mixing claims and clinical data was felt to be critical in order to succeed in this new world. After about a 2-year period in which we went through many options, we finally decided to develop an internal data warehouse that could bring the claims and clinical data together. One of the things that taught us was that in order to do a data warehouse correctly, you really had to have the foundational work of data governance in place. We had a very tight timeline based on our business need and began to work in 2012, as you can see on this timeline, to develop our EDW, and again recognized right from the get-go that we had some issues with data quality when we were going through the validation and mapping process, and really didn't have a centralized way of doing data governance. We didn't have it also at that point really a way to rationalize the data at all, or in some cases catalog or define the data. There weren't consistent definitions across the organization. We also recognized that we didn't have the experience and skill sets that were going to accomplish true data governance. We had to do a lot of learning in a short time frame, and it was a very steep learning curve. The first goal, however, that we wanted to make sure is that we had executive support, and this is key for the data governance initiative, which fortunately for us was easier than we expected it to be. Our leadership team understood these issues and needs and were fully supportive in developing not only the data warehouse but also an enterprise data governance. They understood the importance of data quality and actually had experienced some issues with data quality in some of our reporting. We did a search at that point with multiple vendors because we knew we wanted to have a fairly quick jump start, if you will, for a data governance program, and so we actually reached out to several vendors, did a vendor search, and looked for a consultant to help us. We eventually chose Encore to assist us with this project. And using Encore, we were able, in a fairly short time frame, around 4 to 6 months, establish a 5-year plan that we initiated in March of 2014. Next slide. Since we were relatively naive, to say the least, our initial conversations around data governance really were educational, and those have been going on in the organization since we started the data warehouse project. We sent a lot of material to our leadership team and also our technology and analytics team to get them to better understand the processes and to help kind of shape the goals. These objectives are outlined in the 5 broad areas that you see on the slide, but these are really focused around people, process, and technology. Kind of moving clockwise, we looked at building the infrastructure, obviously what we would need to, that was a goal that we had to have that in place, and the organizational structure behind that. Had to define really what the processes for organizational business rules would be, and which also included clinical rules and hierarchies within our organizational structure. Standardizing data definitions or standardizing data definitions was a very large area that we knew we had issues with. Like many organizations, we had multiple ways of measuring various metrics, all valid in the areas that they're used in, but no easy way to find that definition. Had a recent example just actually about a week ago where we had a surgeon who was looking for a report on a hospital discharge and just wanted a list of the number of patients that were discharged within one of our large hospitals. He assumed that this was an easy request and there really was only one definition. But kind of like the proverbial blind man touching the elephant, he was given multiple reports that gave the perspective from the OR, finance, decision support, and reporting. And needless to say, the metrics didn't match up, and his response, although I can't repeat it, was astonishment and just couldn't believe that we did not have just one definition. But once we talked with him, determined what the need was, we were able to match it up. But it really kind of shows that the multiple definitions and how much of an issue that can be, and certainly causing a lot of problems organizationally. Developing the architectural practice and standards, working with our IT teams, we have begun to standardize how the data is captured and stored. We've also had standardization around the software needed to support just this entire life cycle. And just like with any life cycle, you've got to continually monitor and make improvements in going back through, and this is an ongoing process that takes a lot of support. Next slide. As we developed and refined the objectives with data governance, we had a taste of just how large of a project this would be. We actually sought advice from multiple organizations, and we shared some of the stories around the amount of work and dedication needed. We also learned that we should really start with a small scope and grow slowly, as opposed to doing this in a large fashion, because we knew we had a lot of learning to do. And so from that standpoint, you can look on this slide that data governance has a huge influence, all of which we're just learning. And in fact, just got off a phone call talking about security and privacy within data governance. But we really chose initially to focus on the foundational steps, which are around organizational awareness, education, stewardship, and data quality. And those were the areas that we began our first movement, and then we have gradually started to move into some of these other areas. We certainly have an understanding of these other areas and the needs, but really we've allowed ourselves to kind of grow into those areas. Stewardship, and that's, sometimes when we talk about data stewards, a lot of times we get some some stares back from folks or not understanding, but stewardship in and of itself is really the activity of protecting and being responsible for something or supervising or managing something. And definitionally, it's kind of the careful and responsible management of something entrusted into one's care. And when you break that down, data stewards really are critical in helping us manage the data and the areas of their expertise. So they're the subject matter experts. And it took a little while for us to socialize that concept, but these folks are really critical in assisting with capturing, defining, and standardizing the data approach. And they are very critical to ensure the quality of the data. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. Data quality is integral, and I think everyone on the line can appreciate that. It is key to ensuring the success of any informatics effort. Data quality really is an assessment of the data's fitness to serve its purpose in a given area within a healthcare organization. There may be different levels of data quality to support various areas in the organization, but you have to have the process for data quality. Some of the aspects of data quality include looking at the accuracy, the completeness, the timeliness or updated status, the relevance, the consistency across data sources, the reliability of how it's presented, and how you access the data. The true key to data quality is developing and following a process that addresses all of these areas organizationally. We have found that data quality can be affected in many ways. Two common areas that we have seen have been around technology and in business processes. Like most organizations, when we rolled out our EMR, we were really focused on the usage of the EMR, the acceptance of the EMR, order entry by physicians, the speed of implementation, and financial performance. And as a result, we really weren't as disciplined up front when we developed the fields within the EMR to capture data. And in many cases, we didn't restrict the type of data as we should have. So for instance, we had alphanumeric allowances in a field that should have been purely numeric. There were also issues with how we mapped some flow sheet information and created inadvertently null data. And all of these were found as we started to examine the lineage of the data and the quality of the data. The second example, as you'll see here, is something that plagues a lot of organizations, including ours, and that is involving the identity of the patient. We have had multiple cases of this where duplicate records have been created, as noted on the slide, and the trickle-down effect of this can be tremendous, not only affecting data quality, but also has clinical implications also. Next slide. So going back again to the quality dimensions, and I mentioned this previously in the data quality slide, you do have to keep these areas in mind when you're approaching data quality. And all of these areas are critical to being successful in data governance and in data quality initiatives. Is the data the most up-to-date? Are the areas of the data, are there areas where it's not complete, and understanding how to find that? Is there missing data? And not only that, why is it missing, and finding that out? Is it accurate data? Are there standards on the collection, the storage, and the presentation of the data? And something that we're learning is the transparency of the process to the end user on how the data was transformed or normalized. In a lot of cases, particularly with some of our end users, that piece is key in understanding how the data was taken out of a source system and then transformed into the usage. Next slide. Next slide. So as you're preparing to stand up a data governance model or stand up a data governance program in your systems, we actually used the concept that you see here and the elements to determine what type of data governance structure that we really needed. We spent a lot of time exploring best practices, and again, we visit a lot of other healthcare organization sites. had the consultant as we talked about, and we wanted to learn as much as we could about data governance and some of the mistakes that others have made and some of the positive things that they had done. We also spent a lot of time, and again, I'm going to bring this up several times, working with our executive and management team on the importance of data to the success of the organization and the importance of data governance. As an organization, as we've collected a massive amount of data over the last 5 to 10 years, our leadership team, our physicians are all asking more questions about the data, they're asking more of the data, and there's more questions about how the data is being managed. Within our organization, we have many assets, like all healthcare organizations, including patients, our staff, and now one of those assets, as Randy had mentioned earlier, is our data. And organizationally, our leadership understands that data is an asset. Over time, we have recognized the importance of considering the data as an asset. Just like any other asset, it does require a lot of care and feeding and monitoring. As we progress, we partnered with Encore to understand the components of a successful program and to understand our organization's culture and really work with a consultant on having them understand your culture so you could tailor the right data governance program to your organization. And again, we use the same approach as we did with data in general, and that is looking at the people, where the gaps in skill sets would be to stand up a good data governance program, the processes that either we had in place or we needed to develop, and the technology, the tools, and how they were managed, both from the software within our EDW to how we were managing our business glossary and our data definition glossary. All these components were studied and used as we built the foundation for our program. Next slide. After synthesizing the information that was gained during discovery, and again, that process probably took about 2 to 3 months to go through and look at the process, the people, do a lot of interviews, we looked at 3 approaches to how we should have our data governance model. The first approach really is looking at a federated approach where there's a centralized executive leadership, an operational group that's by service line, and subject matter experts. A more centralized approach really has a centralized executive leadership with a centralized operations group, and then also subject matter experts that really are service line but and functional and within the organization. And then the third approach was looking at a hybrid, which is really a mixture of the two. For our culture within Carilion, which is highly collaborative and consensus-driven, it really made the most sense to us to focus on a centralized model. For us, this allowed for centralization of processes to drive efficiency, which was very important for us. And we also had some elements of a centralized model since we already had some of our reporting and decision support centralized to some degree. We also felt that, again, within our organization, that a centralized model was better able to set standards and was better able to socialize and communicate data governance throughout the organization. Now, this may not be the right approach for you and may not be the right approach for all organizations, but this really gives you an idea of how we worked to figure out what was the best fit for Carilion. Next slide. Next, there we go. So this gives you a schematic of how really we developed a formal governance structure, and we reviewed several options, and this should look very similar. This is not a unique structure by any stretch, and it was really one we found in a lot of different organizations. It starts with an executive leadership steering group, a strategy group, and then work groups that are focused on specific subjects or applications. To ensure good communication, which is key, having the liaisons, as you see, that really represent each one of the groups within the committee above is essential. To ensure this good communication, it's also essential to pick the right folks that are able to communicate to those different groups. Several keys to the success of this structure that we found were identifying the appropriate members for each group, and we took a lot of time in going out and trying to identify which one of the individuals really within our organization could both represent the group that they were a part of and then also represent from a system level. Take time in this process. We did. It really pays off if you get the right folks there, and you need to make sure that they're committed, because this is a commitment. Again, this isn't a project. This is something that is ongoing, and it really then becomes part of that individual's job role. Can't stress enough as we went through this, the educational piece, and then also recognize that there's a balance of the decisions coming from the top and then the ideas and issues that permeate from the bottom. It's a life cycle. It's a life cycle, and we're still learning through that, because this is as much about making decisions at an executive level as it is about getting education and awareness of issues in data governance that are coming up from the bottom. Next slide. So to give you an idea, and again, this is how we structured this, and in different organizations you may find that there may be different components. But for our executive council, really we're composed of a lot of C-suites, so our chief financial officer, strategy officer, nursing officer, information officer, et cetera, really makes up that group, and these are the decision makers, and this group in particular, all of these folks were committed to making data governance work. The executive committee really, in addition to providing the funding and resources, the usual things, oversees the data governance project, but also really only makes decisions when they are brought up from the bottom. Most of our meetings at this point are still educational and learning, but this group really sets the direction. The strategic group is really the workhorses. These, in our organization, this is usually VPs and senior directors that represent multiple areas, as you can see. They're the data domain owners. They're the ones that set a lot of the vision for the program design and oversee the processes that are being developed. They make the decisions based on, again, think of that with the liaison from the work groups up, based on the work groups. And the work groups are really, where the stewards and the data custodians live. These are the folks that are closest to the data. They are being educated and taught and giving us information about the standards and what the quality needs to be. They can identify the ownership of these elements, and they can define the specific data elements themselves. And they bring the issues and the requirements basically back up to the strategic committee. This has worked for us. We have a lot of work groups and continue to expand. Kind of back to the previous slide, we're really starting to expand out a little bit more on our security and privacy, and this group will continue to grow as we bring in more sources into our EDW. Next slide. Although this is a very busy slide, once you have the infrastructure in place, you really need to choose areas to start to develop the process. We chose pay for performance as our first business case, and this was a business case within our EDW to be able to bring claims and clinical data together, and we further refined that down to about 15 pay for performance measures. But it gave us a starting point that we could go in and start to really work with the data, understand the data. The schematic, although, as I said, is busy, it gives you a really high-level view of our approach. And from a physician standpoint, it really is no different than the way I would treat a patient, in that you're going in, you're understanding the individual, you're looking at taking a good history and a review of systems and reviewing old records and performing a physical exam. No different really than going in and understanding the data and deconstructing it, and then doing more testing and analyzing to be able to diagnose what the issues are with the data, and then being able to correct that and make a different process and actually treat. some of those issues when you're finding those that come up, and a lot of those go through the data governance process within the strategic group to be able to make the changes. But really, it's no different. Like when I look at this and how I treat patients and doing prevention and monitoring at the end, all of these steps make sense. And being able to create a process and being able to understand the lineage of the data, the different elements of the data to ensure quality. Next slide. So what have we, in this, our first start into data governance, what have we learned and what are some of the benefits that we've seen? In my mind, one of the key things was the recognition of data as an asset by our organization. This was key. This is a benefit. It's changed the way that our leadership has looked at data. It changed the way that people are using data. Data quality, critical to success. We have had multiple issues of garbage in, garbage out. That has been a benefit we've already started to see, where we've started to correct some of the data quality that we have in some of the source systems using that we're bringing into our data warehouse. That is something that has actually moved further along than we thought at this point. Establishing framework and processes that can be used system-wide is critical, but it's also can be difficult, as we're finding, as you are changing culture. We've had multiple conversations about changing process to drive the quality, and it's sometimes hard to teach old dogs new tricks. Standards are critical. We've talked about that, having the same language. That has been something that has been, we've already started to see benefits, and we've already started to see benefits and efficiency in our data management and the way that we're already starting to recognize errors earlier. We're stopping the propagation of errors, and we've had less redundancy. Data governance has also been a springboard for us to develop other needed processes. An example of that for us is hiring a full-time, for the first time, a business analyst to help gather requirements and process in a really process-driven manner and work with our teams to build out and report the correct information. A last lesson learned really is this is hard work. Do not underestimate the time commitment. Every organization we talk to stress that. Having gone through this in the beginnings and seeing what's ahead, don't underestimate that. Take your time in planning because this is a long-term. This is long-term, and this becomes part of your culture. In the end, it's worthwhile and necessary to do this to gain the fullest potential of the data that you have. Again, thanks for the opportunity to share our experience. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Lori for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Our first question is, can you explain what the biggest challenge you encountered was when you were implementing data governance?
I think our biggest, several challenges. I think our biggest challenge initially was, from an organizational standpoint, is really starting to get all the groups together that were going to be necessary to build a data governance program. That was more challenging than we thought, and again, it just takes a lot of time commitment in getting those folks together. I think other challenges, as I've talked about, really have been around the culture change that it takes to really set up a successful program.
Did you happen to look at the HIMSS Analytics Delta model when you were in your decision-making process?
We did, and we did look at the model, and I think we have actually looked at some of the areas since then when we have, gone back and reassessed where we are with data governance.
Okay. This one, I'm interested in starting data governance at my organization, but I have no idea where to start. Who should I talk to?
Well, what we found out, and we were in a similar, we had knowledge we really had knowledge in pockets within our organization. There were some folks, and because our data was scattered, there were some folks in the organization that did have knowledge of data governance. I would look internally first to see if you have that knowledge. And certainly we found very quickly that this is a new field for healthcare. There's not a whole lot of folks that are doing it, and the ones that had really had brought in consultants to help. And having a consultant and a partner, as we've had with Encore, was very helpful to help bring those areas of the organization together and to kind of get us started and jumpstart the program. So like I say, we found that we tried to get as many people that had knowledge in the organization together, but it was very, very helpful to have a consultant.
Okay, Stephanie asks a good two-question series here. She's wondering, how much did you budget for this initiative, and then how has your level of investment changed as you've learned more?
For the data governance initiative, don't mind being transparent about it, it was probably around, just for the, trying to get the framework up, and this does include some of the software, was probably around $400,000 to $500,000. And we're still tracking ROI on that, although it's very soft, to try to understand how that is progressing. We have not exceeded the budget. In fact, we have stayed within those guidelines. We had, at least in the foreseeable future, and we're not looking at any increased cost for a period of time, and when we started to budget this out over a 5-year period.
Were there any big surprises that you encountered while implementing data governance?
In thinking about that, certainly for me, one of the surprises, and it may just be me being naive, was both the quality of our data in certain areas, but also areas that I did not think where we had data quality issues, where we were uncovering data quality issues. That was a huge surprise to me in some of the areas, and it really varied, because we did have some good quality data, but we also had some areas that I was very surprised. And even though I said, this takes hard work, and we've been told this was hard work, it's still a surprise at how much work and background you have to do to set the foundation of a good data governance program up. That still is surprising, and that was a surprise to me that it was going to take as much, but it has been well worth it, because if you don't have those foundation blocks in place, particularly in our case, as we're building a data warehouse and mapping our data, and to ensure that what's going into the data warehouse is correct. Without those foundations, you're just basically going to replicate issues, which is what we're trying to avoid.
Okay. Did you have the data warehouse infrastructure in place already before you started, or was that part of what you had to acquire as enabling technology?
Excellent question. And we, in our case, had purchased the data warehouse, had purchased the data model, knowing that we had to put some data governance around it as we kind of built the data warehouse. But we had that infrastructure in place, and this is where the surprise was. We realized quickly that we were going to need additional assistance in really pulling together a system-wide data governance program. So some organizations may do this the other way around, but we really had the infrastructure, the hardware and software in place, and then started to stand up the data governance program toward the tail end of the build of our EDW.
Okay, great. That was our last question. Randy, is there anything you'd like to add before I wrap it up?
Nope. Just thanks everyone for being on the phone. It was great talking with everyone about a subject near and dear to my heart.
Great. And I, too, want to thank you, Randy, and also Dr. Morgan for the interesting and informative discussion. I want to also thank our attendees and remind everyone to keep an eye out for a follow-up email from us that will have a link to the recording of the video as well as a PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation that you can download. We hope to see you at future HIS Talk webinars, and I wish you all a fantastic remainder of the day. Thank you.